Thank you for the great introduction and welcome everyone. So in the coming 20 minutes, we're going to take you with us in a conversation, in a dialogue between the tech expert, Pep, and me as a digital ethics expert, and how that's go in our daily practice. So Pepijn, the floor is yours
Yeah.
to start.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Hilary. So the first thing that comes to mind when thinking of generative AI is, of course, the superpowers that it brings to us. And if you compare that between this revolution with ChatGPT launched in November 22, with all the previous revolutions in AI, there's one thing that really stands out. So if you look at previous revolutions, then it was always about man versus machine. It was Kasparov versus Deep Blue. It was Watson versus Ken Jennings. It was Lee Sedol versus AlphaGo. But this time, we have something completely different. We have a friendly chat window that basically gives us all superpowers that is at our disposal at each and every moment. And not just one of the 100 million people who are now on ChatGPT. No, it's also coming to the enterprise. And we're already seeing the impact of that. We're seeing tens of percentages in terms of efficiency, of effectiveness gains in the first tests that we are doing and that are being reported on also in the literature. So I think this is super exciting. It brings a lot of opportunities, but from an ethics perspective, Hilary, how do you look at this?
So to start, what I hear when I hear you talking, I hear another techie who says, I can save the world only with technology. But to be honest, what I also hear is that technology is here to stay, and it will not go. So take a step back and look to a few of those reports that have done some researches in the last couple of months. We see that especially senior IT leaders and other leaders say, or the majority of them say, within the coming 18 months, we will prioritize Gen AI in our business. So check, Gen AI is here to stay. But they also have some concerns around bias outcomes and also concerns on cybersecurity. And we delve a little bit deeper on that. Then I also hear them saying, with those concerns of misinformation, hate speeches, we hear things on inaccurate outcomes. But we also hear and know that this technology is so advanced that also in coding, that if it comes in the wrong hands, it has a huge cyber threat for companies. And then it has threats on employees and on society, but also on their clients. So when you hear superhero stories, I hear the fears of a supervillain. And saying, do we need to say no to Gen AI? Again, no, but we need to talk about how we do it in the right way. Organizations need to adhere to all regulations that they already have. But still, there is a minefield of risks that comes with that around legal, financial, and ethically that they also need to harness. For example, if you have a chatbot in the healthcare sector that gives advice around medicine, basic advice of medicine to patients, and this is wrong, can you imagine what the impact is for this patient and the whole of society? This is huge. And we give that control to a Gen AI. But then again, I still don't say no. I do say we need to think also about those ethical considerations that comes with that. And those ethical frameworks and all the other things that you want to talk about. And I will come back to that later, because first my question to you, Pep, how do you instruct your technical team to create trustworthy AI?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think if we look at that, the first thing there is to understand basically the supervillain that we're dealing with. Because I agree that it is a supervillain and it is something that's potentially very risky. So the first step is understand what is it exactly that's driving this risk. And then I'm not talking about the outcomes, but of what's under the hood. And for me, there are three things that make this an inherently risky technology. And those are the things that you'll also see that we manage. And those three things are truth, scale, and stability. So if we talk about truth, yeah, a lot of people talk about hallucination. I rather use the term bullshitting, because that's also kind of, if you look at more the technical term, I think that's exactly what it is. But on top of that, if you have a system that's very good at bullshitting, and at the same time it's not producing zeros and ones, but it's producing this fuzzy thing that we call natural language, how are you going to keep that in check? How are you going to validate that the thing that comes out is also the thing that you intend? So that's something super important to manage. The second thing about scale, yeah, we're now talking about petabytes of data. We are talking about trillions of parameters. So where in the past you had rather big models with quite some edge cases, if you now explode this to internet scale, you have to imagine that also the edge cases are massively, massively more. And also the intricacies of the model make that you cannot control them. And then in terms of stability, yeah, we know that these models change over time. So also that's something to manage. So how do we do that? Basically, it's all in the process, from defining the solution to designing to developing and in the end delivering. And what we see is that many of the companies nowadays are very much focused on building, building, building. How do we develop these type of solutions? And that's actually the wrong place to start. The right place to start is really at the beginning, at how do you define the solution? And defining, yes, in terms of objectives, but in particular, that last point, how does it fit into the process? What is the task that you give this AI model? And I'm explicitly saying task and not role, because you have to make it so small that you can control it. Then you get into the design. A lot to say about that, but one thing to highlight there is that what we do if we build solutions like this is not just unleash the generative AI. No, we look at basically that whole pipeline and we say, okay, what are the pieces of that pipeline where we want to give this AI a role? So that's where your design patterns come in. And there's a lot of evolution in that now, and we see a lot of patterns where you can basically control the risk by choosing the right patterns. In terms of the development, yeah, that is then one that is really triggered by the ones above. The most important thing there is testing. And if you look at it in general, it's an unsolved problem for LLMs and generative AI. How do you really properly test it? But if you've done the first steps right, if you have defined it right, if you have designed it right, then you're also in a position to develop a testing strategy that matches what you have designed. So that's a super important step. In the end, when it comes to deliver, there's one thing that I'm going to highlight there, and that is the use of your users in the process, because they are, in the end, your allies and not your enemy. And that's something that in that process is super important. So in a sense, there's a lot of live testing going on. So also, if you build solutions like this, make sure that you also have the feedback loops, not just the formal testing, but also the direct feedback loop from the users. So those are a couple of the things that I think are super important. So let me pause there for the technical talk. Let me also, basically then reflect back to you, Hilary, because when we first had, we're meeting, I was basically, beforehand, I was a little bit worried because, I was going to meet ethics. So I was thinking, okay, she's probably going to say no to everything that I propose that we do. So then after that conversation, I was totally surprised that the word no never occurred. So really eager to hear your perspective, Hilary. How do you go into those type of conversations, and what's the approach that you would take?
Yeah, and also you realized after that conversation that ethics people are really nice people.
Very nice people, very nice.
But indeed, it is not about saying no. It's all about saying how and do the right thing. And let us go a little bit back in history. And I think in 1860 something, the patent for a car was established with the first gas engine. And if you look at how a car looked then and how a car looked now, a lot has changed, especially around the topic of safety. We have brakes, we have seat belts, we have appropriate environments, we have law and regulations. And all those things are there in place to ensure that the car does limited harm. And that's also what we want for Gen AI. So when we look at Gen AI and we make we look at Gen AI in a car, the biggest difference is Gen AI goes in a pace that is really fast. We don't have the time, just like a car, to develop it in the same pace. We need to go quicker. And legislation is lacking behind. And that is no reason to use this superhero without the right safety measurements. So questions to think about are, how do we train our people? How do we validate outcome? Because one of the biggest risks is inaccurate outcomes. But also, what do we do with misinformation? How do we deal with that? So all those things are there to do so. But we already established we can't stop with Gen AI. So when I look to ethical tools, there are already a lot there, and there are a lot of companies who advise on that or are passionate about that. So we have ethical frameworks, we have assessment lists, we have bias analysis, we have ethical boards where you can go to dilemmas. All those criteria and how to set them up are there. There are people who knows how to help you. And that's really important when you use this superpower of a Gen AI, that you don't forget those seatbelts. And when you, for example, also, Pep said, you need to bring that user with you. And that's indeed, but those users, you need to bring them with you from the start, because it impacts every person's daily life, and we are all different. Here in this audience, we are all different. So Pep, one of my biggest issues that I have with as a digital ethics expert is, how do I make clear to tech people like you that creating successful Gen AI is not just looking at the technical side, but also to the ethical side?
Yeah, and that's a super interesting question, because there is this tension, and we already mentioned it earlier in the talk. And for me, kind of the source of that tension is often from the difference between the ethical mindset and the engineering mindset. The ethical mindset, in its nature, is very much holistic. It's very much top-down. Well, the engineering mindset is very much bottom-up. It's very much focused on, okay, how do I get to that next pull request? Where is my next feature going to be? And basically, that solving at that level is also what makes engineers good at what they do. So, in a sense, it's also unfair to ask from a development team to also take the ethical role. Of course, they should be aware of it, and that's, I think, the first thing that you should do. But the second thing you should do, in your development process, organize for ethics. And that doesn't mean that every engineer has to do it, but you need to have checkpoints in your development cycle to really kind of take a step back together as a team and have someone who basically challenge you to come out of that funnel thinking. So that's, for me, the most important piece.
I will take that with me.
Cool. So with that, we are, at the end of our talk. So I think maybe to summarize briefly kind of the key takeaways for me from this is really, first of all, it's all about how. It's not about saying no, it's really about asking how. Second of all, it's really finding that combination between, on the one hand, the bottom-up, on the other hand, the top-down and the holistic, and finding the right balance that works for you. And the third one is really, there's so much already developed in this space. Yeah, you don't have to start from scratch. So really, make sure that you leverage what is there in order to get where you want to be.
And maybe if I want to add a little bit, maybe my personal hopes and dreams what I have with Gen AI. It's a little bit holistic, but what I really hope is that we find a way that Gen AI strengthens human beings, that we find a way that Gen AI makes impact on our lives and do no harms to our lives. But also that, especially for the leaders and the developers here in the room, that when you create Gen AI, that you acknowledge that it's okay that you don't know everything, that you don't realize that how technology make impact on people's life with a different background, or people who looks different like you, or to be honest, make it personal, that you maybe don't know how Gen AI make impact on people who looks like me. And the moment that you acknowledge that, that is the moment when you will realize trustworthy AI or Gen AI is really important, because then you're going to start asking for support. So with this,
Yeah.
last note, we will end it, and we have like 1 or 2 minutes still left for a few questions.
Yeah.